If you thought Trump was only going after criminal immigrants, I have a bridge to sell you. President Trump ruined the weekend of a lot of highly skilled workers and immigration attorneys with a Friday announcement that all H-1B visa applicants would now have to pay a whopping $100,000 non-refundable fee to have their applications processed. Now, if this sounds like an insane thing that doesn't seem like the president has the power to do, well, you're correct. This fee wasn't created by statute, it wasn't the subject of any agency rulemaking, it was just dropped into a brief, vaguely worded executive order that would take effect in less than 48 hours. And that's not how this works. And of course, chaos ensued. People canceled trips, people rushed home to the US from abroad. It was an absolute mess. And because this thing was so poorly worded and not thought out, many legal experts interpreted the vague language of the executive order to mean that H-1B visa holders who were currently traveling abroad would have to pay the $100,000 fee just to re-enter the United States. Tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft issued memos to their employees urging H-1B visa holders not to travel abroad and to return immediately if they were abroad. So people booked expensive last-minute flights and deboarded other expensive international flights. India's Ministry of External Affairs warned of humanitarian consequences and, quote, disruption caused for families. India's leaders encouraged its government offices to do whatever they could to help Indian H-1B visa holders to return to the United States within 24 hours. There was so much chaos that the administration had to issue another hastily written memo, basically in the form of a press release, on Saturday clarifying that this only applies to prospective applicants. But the administration doubled down on the six-figure fee, did not revise the language of the executive order, and all despite the fact that it will make it difficult, if not impossible, for many qualified workers to obtain these visas and could create substantial gaps in US industries, especially in the tech industry, leading to yet more inflation. President Trump's executive order, titled Restriction on Entry of Certain Non-Immigrant Workers, declared that, quote, the entry into the United States of aliens as non-immigrants to perform services in a specialty occupation under H-1B is restricted except for those aliens whose petitions are accompanied or supplemented by a payment of $100,000. The effective date of this proclamation shall be 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on September 21st, 2025. So in brief, anyone who wants their H-1B visa processed now has to cough up $100,000 effective immediately. The administration justified the massive fee by arguing that, quote, the large-scale replacement of American workers through systemic abuse of the program has undermined both our economic and national security.
They took our jobs!
President Trump claimed that he had authority to unilaterally create this fee under sections 1185F and 1182A of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Those were the sections used for the so-called Muslim ban. That is extremely legally questionable, but more on that later. The executive order also contained a massive, vaguely worded loophole stating, quote, this section shall not apply to any individual alien, all aliens working for a company, or all aliens working in an industry if the Secretary of Homeland Security determines, in the Secretary's discretion, that the hiring of such aliens to be employed as H-1B specialty occupation workers is in the national interest and does not pose a threat to the security or welfare of the United States. So according to the text of the executive order, Kristi Noem can waive that $100,000 fee pretty much whenever she wants, even for entire industries, if she so chooses, for any reason or no reason at all. And it looks like she doesn't even have to tell the public who she's waiving it for or why. The executive order was brief and poorly worded enough to create a lot of legal confusion. The plain language of the executive order seemed to indicate that H-1B visa holders would not be able to even re-enter the US unless they had paid the $100,000 fee. The language stated, quote, the entry into the United States of aliens as non-immigrants to perform services in a specialty occupation under section H-1B is restricted except for those aliens whose petitions are accompanied or supplemented by a payment of $100,000. This led several tech companies and many legal experts to conclude that if an H-1B employee was currently traveling outside the United States, they may need to pay the hefty fee just to re-enter. In light of this, Amazon, Microsoft, and several other employers sent messages to their employees urging them to stay in the country for now, even if they had travel plans for the immediate future, and to return before the September 21st deadline if they're currently out of the country. And that was a tall order, considering that the executive order wasn't released until Friday. So a lot of people were trying to book last-minute flights, fearing that they would either be unable to re-enter or would only be able to re-enter after paying Trump's exorbitant, questionably legal fees. And Trump's equally hasty and brief memo did little to allay the confusion, leaving many questions about who might be exempt, how the administration would roll this out, and most importantly, what possible legal authority the president could have to impose this sudden massive fee. And we've covered executive orders quite a bit on this channel, but to reiterate, an executive order cannot change the law. It is not law. It is merely a memo written to the rest of the executive branch directing them how to act, but only applies where the executive has any discretion. It absolutely cannot contradict a law passed by Congress. which, spoiler alert, this executive order absolutely does. Now, some experts predicted that the $100,000 price tag would force companies to move high-value work overseas, hampering the US's position in the high-stakes artificial intelligence race with China. Others argue that this would make it impossible for small businesses to hire any expert foreigners and would have larger implications for American innovation, undercutting the very reasons for the creation of the H-1B visa. And others, including the libertarian Cato Institute, warn that the prohibitively high $100,000 fee would effectively end the 35-year-old H-1B visa program. And this whole fiasco shows how much chaos can come from a system that hides the rules until it's too late. Unfortunately, that kind of opacity isn't just limited to immigration law. It's also exactly how data brokers operate with your personal information and sell it to anyone who wants to buy it. And because the Trump administration has even partnered with big tech companies like Palantir to amp up surveillance on US citizens, if you've been dragging your feet implementing good digital security measures, now might be the time to start thinking seriously about anonymity and data protection. And that's why I want to thank today's sponsor, Incogni. Incogni is a longtime supporter of independent journalism, and they make it easy for you to fight back against data brokers who buy, sell, and profit from your personal information. These companies vacuum up your home address, phone number, and even detailed histories from all over the internet. And they put it into databases that anyone can pay to access, employers, scammers, and whoever else wants to dig into your life. Incogni removes your personal data from online data brokers by searching the internet, reaching out directly on your behalf, and forcing them to take your personal info down. If these data brokers resist, Incogni will take care of that too, because Incogni fights back. These data brokers are the reason why in the US you can search your name and find a bunch of websites that will give anyone your home address, phone number, and extensive history. It's shocking just how easy it is to find all this information. It might also be why you're getting so many spam calls lately or even had your identity stolen. Now, I've been using Incogni for years, and in that time you can see I've been on hundreds of lists, some of which had a high sensitivity score, meaning the broker had tons of data on me. Luckily, Incogni has completed hundreds of takedowns for me over the years. I could never do this myself, so thank you to Incogni for saving me weeks worth of work and adding me to over 40 suppression lists. And Incogni will continue to conduct ongoing removals, because even if the broker removes your data once, they can always collect it and publish it again. So if online privacy is important for you, give Incogni a try. If you click on the link that's on screen or down below, you can try Incogni risk-free for 30 days with a 60% off discount and get a full refund if you're not into it. And if you do decide to keep it, you'll still get the exclusive 60% off discount, so long as you use my link or the code LegalEagle, all one word. So sign up for Incogni or I'll see you in court. But the H-1B visa program was created by Congress in 1990 in order to help US companies meet the labor requirements for highly specialized jobs where not enough Americans possess the required skills. It involves a highly detailed, regimented process governed by 2 federal agencies and requires the coordination of the prospective employee and employer. And guess what? Congress, in its infinite wisdom, already set the requirements and fees for H-1B applicants that they have to complete, and paying $100,000 is not one of them. Now, that being said, H-1B visas aren't without controversy. Supporters of the H-1B visa program argue that it encourages innovation by allowing companies to bring in the best and brightest from all over the world and fill essential positions when there are domestic labor shortfalls. And in fact, some of the US's most prominent tech leaders, like Sundar Pichai of Google and Satya Nadella of Microsoft and Elon Musk, were able to come here under H-1B visas. But critics of the program argue that it suppresses domestic wages and causes higher levels of American unemployment, especially for workers in the tech sector, because companies can hire workers from around the world, bring them to the US, and pay them less. But either way, the vast majority of H-1B visas are granted to workers in the tech industry, with 2/3 of H-1B visas going to workers in computer-related industries. In the past year, Amazon has sponsored the highest number of workers on H-1B visas, followed by Tata, Microsoft, Meta, Apple, and Google. And about 3/4 of H-1B visas approved in 2023 were given to Indian workers. But the H-1B process is governed by 8 U.S.C. 1101. And even before President Trump ostensibly created a $100,000 hurdle, there were a lot of impediments to getting an H-1B visa. Only people in specialized fields could qualify, and they have to have an employer that has agreed to sponsor them. The employer has to promise to pay no less than the prevailing wage, and that the hiring of the H-1B employee won't adversely affect other workers. Employers are also prohibited from hiring foreign workers during a strike. For most employment sectors, H-1B visas are also strictly capped. Generally, only 85,000 H-1B visas can be granted annually. Of those, 20,000 are set aside for workers with an advanced degree from a U.S. institution. Universities, nonprofit organizations, and a handful of other categories are exempt from the cap. But because there are a limited number of slots, in order to get an H-1B visa, the applicant has to win the visa lottery. Though in addition to adding a $100,000 fee, the Trump administration is talking about rewriting this lottery process. Don't get me started. But in 2024, there were 758,000 eligible electronic registrations, and only 110,000 people were selected for an H-1B visa. And the process is also very time-consuming. Employers have to register with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, then identify an employee. The employee must then be selected in the lottery, then the employer must file certification paperwork with the U.S. Department of Labor. And H-1B visas are time-limited. They're typically only good for 3 years and can be extended only for another 3 years. And before Trump's big announcement, the H-1B visa process typically cost a few $1,000s. That includes a basic filing fee of $460, a fraud prevention fee of $500, an additional $750 to $1,500 fee that's ostensibly used to retrain American workers, and employers can also pay an optional $2,800 as a premium fee to get expedited processing. These fees and all the procedural requirements for obtaining an H-1B visa were set by Congress, with statutes subject to all the usual political debate and negotiation. And in the past, there have been multiple fee increases for the program. In 1998, President Clinton signed a law passed by Congress that increased the job retraining fees to $500. He later signed a law increasing it further to $1,000. And in 2004, President George W. Bush signed a law increasing the fee to $1,500. But all these increases were incremental and were created by congressional legislation, which the president then signed into law. It goes without saying, but they were not huge increases created by an executive order. And it also goes without saying that creating a six-figure fee in an executive order and implementing that in under 48 hours is entirely unprecedented. And in the face of such a massive sudden change, many experts expect that lawsuits will be filed imminently. So there are a lot of problems with this executive order, but the most obvious problem with the executive order is that the president simply doesn't have the powers to unilaterally impose this kind of fee or make this kind of drastic change to the immigration system. Congress has already written laws prescribing the processes and fees for H-1B visas. The Administrative Procedure Act, Section 706, allows a court to set aside an executive action as being ultra vires even if an agency has gone through the proper rulemaking process, which of course Trump did not do here. But under that provision, an executive action is ultra vires if it is, quote, in excess of statutory jurisdiction, authority, or limitations, or short of statutory right. Now, Trump has claimed that his authority to create his $100,000 fee exists under 1182F and 1185A of the Immigration and Nationality Act. He believes these provisions of the law allow him to bypass the ordinary legislative process and impose a fee so onerous that experts believe it will effectively end the program. But many legal experts think he's wrong about this. Courts have found that the authority under Section 1185 and 1182 substantially overlap. So if one doesn't grant the president the authority to do this, the other likely won't either. And Section 1185 states that, quote, unless otherwise ordered by the president, it shall be unlawful for any alien to depart from or enter or attempt to depart from or enter the United States, except under such reasonable rules, regulations, and orders, and subject to such limitations and exceptions as the president may prescribe. Section 1182F states that, quote, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. And Section 1182F was also used by Trump during his first administration to try to force asylum applicants to stay in Mexico. In East Bay Sanctuary Covenant versus Trump, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals considered a challenge to Trump's executive order about asylum. And the court found that while Section 1182F did give the president some powers, it did not give him the power to rewrite the statute that Congress had passed. The court stated, quote, the proclamation attempts to accomplish one thing. It does indirectly what the executive cannot do directly, amend the INA. Just as we may not, as we are often reminded, legislate from the bench, neither may the executive legislate from the Oval Office. And the Supreme Court has explicitly agreed in Trump versus Hawaii, a 2018 case on Trump's first-term travel ban, and the court stated, quote, we may assume that Section 1182F does not allow the president to expressly override particular provisions of the INA. And recently, in a case called Tabata Bayafar versus Scott, a judge in the Arizona District Court also ruled that Section 1182F does not justify the restrictions on asylum and immigration that Trump had created in his January 2025 executive order on, quote, guaranteeing the state's protection against invasion. The court found that the scope of the power granted to the president under 1182F is broad but not limitless. And most importantly, the president cannot countermand an act of Congress. Now, this is just a trial court, but the Arizona court found that Congress has authorized the president to suspend entry and to impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate, and that express delegation of powers necessarily means that anything outside of that would be ultra vires and impermissible. And it's very likely that Trump's H-1B executive order / proclamation is similarly ultra vires. Congress has already laid out the parameters for H-1B visas in several laws. And the H-1B Visa Reform Act of 2004 and the USCIS Stabilization Act already set fees for H-1B visas, and the INA already governs the process. And several regulations govern the more granular parts of the process, like employment certification requirements. But nowhere in any of those laws has Congress allowed the president at his discretion to essentially end the H-1B visa program by tacking on a six-figure fee. Which leads us to the next very obvious legal challenge. The president, once again, has usurped Congress's power. Under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress, not the executive, has the power of the purse. And Congress, quote, shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And while Congress might delegate that power to set specific fees and fines to the executive, that did not happen here. Instead, as we've discussed, Congress expressly set the H-1B visa fees in statute. And Congress never authorized an additional, entirely unjustified $100,000 fee. And by creating this onerous, sudden additional fee in the executive order, Trump has exceeded his authority and usurped congressional budgeting power. And as we saw in the tariff cases, this could also implicate the so-called major questions doctrine. Under that doctrine, theoretically, because it's been applied incredibly one-sidedly in the past, but under that doctrine, if the Congress intends to delegate issues of great economic and political significance to the executive branch, that delegation has to be very explicit and give, quote, clear congressional authorization. Now, the Supreme Court has not exactly been consistent in applying the major questions doctrine, but if they were to apply that doctrine consistently, it would almost certainly apply to a $100,000 fee imposed by fiat, which will effectively make it impossible to get a category of visas and could have a major impact on the tech industry, which would probably be the kind of thing that requires clear congressional authorization. And another potential basis for a lawsuit would be the Administrative Procedure Act, which has been the basis of a lot of lawsuits against the Trump administration. Trump has often tried to change the law passed by Congress, which he cannot do. But sometimes Congress passes a law, but intentionally leaves discretion to the executive, which then promulgates regulations or rules. But even if this had been within the discretion of the executive and had merely changed a rule that had previously been promulgated, Section 553 of the Administrative Procedure Act, or APA, requires that when an executive agency wants to make a rule change, it has to go through specific processes in order to make that change. Agencies have to publish a proposed rule, take public comment on the rule, and then actually consider the comments they receive, and eventually publish a final rule justifying the agency's choices. And if the agency fails to do this, the actions can be challenged under the APA. And that's been happening a lot with the Trump administration, especially when they try to change things via executive order. Executive orders cannot change the law, and they can't even change rules and regulations without certain processes. But the chaos and uncertainty created by Trump's sudden $100,000 fee perfectly illustrates why the APA requires notice and comment in the rulemaking process. If DHS had published a proposed rule raising the fees to $100,000, there likely would have been a lot of public comment. There would have been discussion about how unclear the rule is, and no one would have been booking $8,000 last-minute plane tickets because they were confused about whether the rule applied to them. Notice and comment rulemaking isn't just democratic, it provides clarity about who the rule applies to, why it exists, and ensures fairness. So for now, it sounds like a lot of immigration attorneys have their work cut out for them, and I'm sure the lawsuits will start flooding in. But if you need a good lawyer to deal with this insane Trump administration, I know a guy. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.